All right, hey everyone, this is John Payne with the Cash Flow Veteran Podcast. This is episode number 10, and I'm with Andric Hofrichter, who has the IBCstory.com, where he educates and coaches individuals on the IBC, or the infinite banking concept strategies. So, Andric, thanks so much for being here, and I'm glad we're going to sit down and have this discussion.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I'm excited.
Right on. So there's a little bit of the context that I want to get into in a second, but I want to wait till we actually start that conversation there for the infinite banking concept, because for at least my audience that's going to be here, they're typically military affiliated people. So I want to have, from your perspective as an IBC coach, a person that helps people with this concept and this strategy. I want to be able to have you talk about it somewhat unadulterated, and then have me come in, at least from my experience as a dependent, as a contractor at one time, as an active duty person, a reserve person. I've ran the gamut of kind of military affiliation. I grew up with it. My wife's still active duty, so I'm still a dependent. So I can help translate to help people see why this is actually a very important strategy for those military affiliated people, and how powerful it really can be. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and just talk about, in general, what's your general history, your background, and then why would you even start a business, a coaching business with IBC, and just get into some of that. So go ahead and take it away for me, Andrew.
Sure. Well, I guess the short answer would be, when you're trying to decide what to start a business in, you should pursue something that you love. And that's why I got into this. So
Yeah.
I actually, came from a background that didn't have any entrepreneurship or anything like that in it. For most of my life, I followed a very traditional path. I was born in Germany, but came to the US when I was pretty young. So I basically lived in Nebraska most of my life. I went to college, got an undergrad degree in civil engineering from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And then I went down to Auburn, Alabama, which didn't realize I was so close to the hub of all this IBC knowledge at the time.
Yep.
But I went down there and got a grad degree in civil engineering. And then I worked, I've been working ever since as a structural engineer. So I have that very technical kind of mathematically, give me the hard numbers kind of background.
Yeah.
But as any of us do, at one point I was exposed to this whole idea of starting a business, entrepreneurship, what's possible out there. And when it kind of struck me, when I thought about wanting to start something like this, I thought about what I really wanted to do. And I realized, well, there's this thing that I'm already doing, which is telling everyone I know about IBC. So let's turn that into a business, and I can do what I love for a career. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I have a really similar story for that. I mean, I started getting into, paying for different programs, and how we've came to know each other too. I mean, I bought a course from Jason Stapleton, and so we're in the 9-figure network with him, which is, basically a version of an awesome social media platform, but also, structured in a mastermind kind of way. So it's nice that we're able to kind of do that. But for me, I grew up, I'm totally different from you. I'm a political science. I thought I wanted to do math and science and all this stuff, but I ended up doing political science and really loving it. I love writing persuasive papers, which I found out later, that's why I really enjoy writing copy, where I do copywriting and other stuff. And then I also should have been doing like face-to-face, sales, or even stage sales or something like that a long time ago, which is why I spent 5-6 years as an instructor inside the Air Force, doing one-on-ones, doing smaller group settings and also larger settings. And why I actually enjoy kind of getting up on stage, which a lot of people are just absolutely terrified of that. And so that's kind of what has led me down to go this podcasting route as well. And so I'm trying to be in my unique ability and bring that out. But I have a love of all things, veteran and military. And I feel like we've been sold the bill of goods for our service and serving for our country and sacrificing for our country, and feeling at the same time that the very things that it has gave us benefits for, whether it's education benefits or retirement benefits or medical benefits, are all things that are contributing to the devaluation of the dollar, to basically undermining the very freedoms that we have. Because I don't feel more free today than when I joined the military, or at any other point in time in my life. And I always ask people that: do you actually feel freer today than you do some other at any other point in time in history? Whether that's your personal anecdotal experience, or whether that's the objective experience that we have with this country that we have. So appreciate the background real quick. So I'll continue talking a little bit. So it's not to hear my own voice, but I want to make sure we get the context right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I emailed to Andric getting ready for this conversation was a little blurb about why I was doing it this way. So this is from that email originally. So for context, many military members look to stay in for a 20-year career, which means that they can retire. They receive 50% of their previous pay starting immediately. Typically, that's within their 40-year-old, 50-year-old time frame, and maintain full medical coverage at that point. They also have the option of investing through 401k style vehicle, whether that's traditional or Roth, using the Thrift Savings Plan or TSP. In 2018, they created the blended retirement system, the BRS, where they can match 5% of those contributions that in that 401k style vehicle. And now they only get 40% retirement at 20 years of service. Plus, through their entire career, military jobs are consistently in demand, and they tend to have very good job security, which is why some people end up getting them. But as I'm sure that Andric can guess, their pay as a government employee is a net drag on the productive capacity of the economy. The military system is a Keynesian's dream come true because it boosts the consumer power of any region with a military presence. Many military towns couldn't exist without the military influx of dollars to the local community. It inflates the real estate prices. It means the local median income is always typically lower than the military population's income. And so it prices out a lot of people and creates distortions within those local markets. And to me, talking entrepreneurship / IBC is a way to try to really short circuit the thought process of my fellow veterans, my fellow military members, active duty reserve, or spouses, and short circuit their behavior as well, even though they're well-meaning people who I believe are the salt of the earth and they're doing the right thing by serving their country. They just don't realize that the employment is a contributing factor to the disintegration of our economy and of our country overall. And I want to help people secede from the system. And it takes having a conversation with someone like Andric to understand why IBC is so powerful. So with that context, let's get into what is IBC and why do you think it's so important, Andric?
IBC, so it's the infinite banking concept,
Right.
Is the title, and it was developed by a guy by the name of R. Nelson Nash, who actually just passed away a little over a year ago.
Unfortunately,
very unfortunately, the world has lost a great asset there. But
yeah.
So it's an infinite banking concept. The key noun being concept, which means it's in your mind. It's a thought process. It is a different kind of philosophy of handling money and dealing with the banking function of your life. It's all about bringing the banking function down to the you and me level, where if we can teach people to handle money like a banker, to think like a banker, and then set them up with the right kind of assets so that they can function like a banker, just that aspect of changing their financing needs will kind of dramatically and forever change their financial lives. The goal, especially if you listen to people like Robert Murphy and Carlos Lara, is bringing the banking level function down to the you and me level, and removing our dependence on the corrupt banking system from a grassroots method, from the bottom up, rather than trying to topple it from the top down. It's something that we can do, you and me, now, rather than waiting for something in the future.
Right. So one of the things that you've been able to do as kind of an IBC coach is to take what you've had in your story and help other people kind of have that same story. And I love the positioning that you have on your website at the ibcstory.com is to talk about, hey, this is my story. This is where I came from in your about section, but are you ready to start your story? What is, and I think that's beautiful positioning to help people kind of understand and at least get people interested just to click on it, just to get a little bit more information. So what have you seen as far as people that you've been able to help, and what are some of those stories of their minds being changed or the impact that you've seen with IBC?
Well, it's usually a very long process. Most of the folks that I've seen or worked with, it takes them years before they have that ultimate light click moment where they start seeing what's actually happening here, and they're like, oh, this is pretty neat. I've had a few conversations with people who are just getting started, and some of them have kind of seen it, and some of them have just kind of, well, that's interesting, and I should probably do that, and then they never come back to it,
right?
Just because the things of life get in the way. But the people who really get it, sometimes we see just drastic results. Like, people turning tens of thousands of dollars of debt around in 26 months or something like
Right.
that, and then being in a position where cash flow wise they're in the positive shortly thereafter. So it all comes back to kind of the four, what I call the four primary actions of IBC. The first one being we eliminate the outside debt rapidly, and a lot of the people who come in, that's where they're at. Is they're honestly mostly still in the Dave Ramsey mindset of
Right.
debt bad, get rid of debt, it's the worst thing
Yep.
in the world, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But
Yeah.
there's a difference between outside debt, the debt that is controlled by someone else and you're paying them, versus inside debt, which is the debt that you own and you're paying yourself.
Right.
So that's kind of step one, and that's usually where we're starting with people, and sometimes we see incredible results. I think the average for Life Success Legacy, which is the group that I work with, kind of based out of Kansas, is about 5 to 7 years. Our average client is completely free of outside debt in 5 to 7 years.
That's awesome.
So, which is pretty good.
I certainly want to get into kind of what the other three topics, and I don't want you to give away anything either. So feel free to say no if you need to. But one of the things that you mentioned when you talk about Dave Ramsey, like there's so many things that I see where he's coming from and I understand. But then he gets into his investing and some of the other strategies. And there's another guy that it was in episode 7 and episode 8 that I talked about it, but it was, Family Inc. by a guy named Douglas McCormick a little bit. And he goes in, his is a very comprehensive book, but again, and it's almost just, you can go on CNBC, you can go on any other generic website, and it's like the number one advice you're going to get about life insurance is buy term and invest the difference. And you have plenty of people that all of a sudden get into this large argument about it, especially if someone brings up something like the infinite banking concept. And I certainly want people to understand that a whole life insurance policy is certainly more expensive on your monthly budget. And I understand that people have a mindset typically that they see what they can fit into their monthly budget to assume that it's affordable for them, which that's really such the low time preference and the paycheck to paycheck attitude that fosters and encourages is part of the problem. And that's also where I think that the buy term and invest the difference also contributes to that same mindset, rather than what you're talking about with the concept of being able to think bigger and understand that you're seceding from the banking system in a way. And that takes a whole different thought process in order to do.
Yeah. So, there's a couple things that automatically come to mind whenever I start hearing people talk about that. And one of them is in the introduction, I think it's the introduction, it's like page 1 of Becoming Your Own Banker. I've got it highlighted right here because it's so important. Page 3, sorry. Yeah. Right there.
Yeah.
He says, this book is not about investments of any kind.
Right.
It's about how you finance the things of life, which can certainly include investments, right? So there's this categorization problem where we're trying to compare investments versus IBC, and they're completely different worlds. They're not comparable. That being said, even I have done that comparison, where on my website I have a series of articles comparing term versus whole insurance. Yep. And I emphasize over and over again that this is a bad comparison, but I do it anyway because that's the prevailing mindset, right?
Right.
And even approaching it that way, it's not a bad place to put money, just by itself. And that completely misses the point of why we're doing it, which is the control and the access and the financing purposes.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I like Carlos Lara's explanation of this when he has those sidebar conversations with a lot of people. And it's been on his, the podcast that him and Bob Murphy do. And it's been in other, the Laura Murphy report and stuff too. And the different items that they have that they talk about. And he goes back to this, he goes, and I don't remember which book it's in. So there's a number of books that I think people should absolutely get. Number 1 is obviously Becoming Your Own Banker, like the original Nelson Nash product that he had. And the other 2, that one right there. And I'm going to actually have links to the infinitebanking.org website that's going to have some of this, unless you want me to plug something of yours for some of that at any point in time. But I'm going to put those there as a resource. And I could not find it for the life of me. It's in here somewhere. We've been moving my whole desk around, and I built basically a new podcasting studio / office. And so we've been doing that. And so I'm not sure where all the books are. I actually think I let somebody borrow that Becoming Your Own Banker book. And I'm like, I haven't seen that in a while. So I'm just going to get probably a new copy and just reread it again. as one of the best topics. But the other ones that they've come out with are, I'm pretty sure they started out with how privatized banking really works. Was kind of one of their first ones. And then they came back and did another issue called The Case for IBC, How to Secede from Our Current Monetary Regime, One Household at a Time. That one right there. Yep.
Another fantastic book, especially for business owners.
Right. And it goes so far beyond when you're looking at it. I said it's an asset management system. I mean, it's not just a system, like you said, it's a concept, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of life. And that may have missed the point as far as being for assets. It's really just a cash flow management system. It's really just a true banking system. But people, the idea or the definition of banking in their mind just doesn't quite, I think, take hold because they only have very limited understanding of what they believe banking to really be. But they draw it out in the book and they really go through. And one of the things that Carlos Lara does, he goes, what would you think the ideal, the perfect investment would be? Again, like you said, it's not about investing. It's not apples to apples comparison, but he goes, fine. If I'm going to meet people where they're critiquing this and where they are, I'm going to. And so they start listing all these things out about what would be the ideal investment. And it turns out a whole life insurance policy from a company that predates the income tax, that predates the Federal Reserve, companies that have been around for over 200 years, turn out they actually make very good investments if they've been around that long, right?
Yeah.
And when you go with a reputable company like that, it turns out that that vehicle is still a better investment vehicle in that flawed comparison to begin with. It may not make as much money, but then again, I mean, is the stock market really the economy? Is it really the health of the economy? Or is it just another way for these large institutions that are in bed with government in order to just suck more wealth out of common everyday people like you and I, and people that are on the lowest rungs as well? So that's always been one of the most frustrating things for me in this whole conversation, because they're not the same. It's not the same comparison, and it takes a pill. It's kind of like this whole red pill, blue pill type mentality. You really kind of have to take some of it in doses too, like you've said.
Yeah.
So what are some of your personal experiences for yourself? How long have you actually been practicing IBC? And then how long have you actually been coaching and helping other people do the same thing?
Well, I've owned policies for somewhere around 6 years now.
Nice.
And I've researched it for 2 to 3 years before that, because just like everyone else, it was a very lengthy process for me to break my mind of all the previous things I had assumed to be true that just weren't.
Yeah.
And so, 3 years of research, 5 or 6 years of owning policies at this point. And then I've been telling people about it since before I bought my first policy, actually. Just engaging people with the idea, trying to get other people to check it out and tell me what they think and all that kind of stuff, or just trying to convince them that it's amazing. And I've been doing it officially in a job type capacity for about 1.5 years now.
Gotcha.
And that's one of the reasons I work so closely with Life Success Legacy, because there we've got a whole team of guys who have been doing it for 15, 20 years, tons of experience and different personalities, so that they mesh very well with whoever comes to get help from us. So.
Yeah. One of the things for me, just from my experience with this, is it took me about 1 year or so to really start digging into this. It was also one of the things that part of it's kind of my libertarian transformation a little bit as well. I think there's multiple things that kind of coalesced all at the same time. And I just started because, Bob Murphy is a pacifist for all intents and purposes. He's, I started listening to his, and sorry for people that don't know, he's, I would say a world-renowned economist of the Austrian business cycle theory. And has opened my mind for a lot of the nerdy stuff I like getting into when it comes to economics. And he's totally revolutionized my mindset about understanding. And it's made a more comprehensive and yet a more fair system that I believe that's out there. And I always listen to the stuff he has, listen to Tom Woods or anybody else. One of the other podcasts I was listening to at the time was a guy by the name of MC Laubscher, and he runs the Cash Flow Ninja podcast. And he is actually not a coach, but he's a life insurance agent, and he runs his own private insurance company, but he specializes in, he's one of the few, and what people don't know is if you want to be an agent, an insurance agent that will help you build one of these policies, you need to go to the infinitebanking.org/finder to be able to actually find specific people who can get you the right policy for this. And he's the one I'd listened to for a long time and really got introduced to the concept uh, anyway. And I've been able to work with him for the last 3 years or so. And it's been awesome for us because one of the things, like you were talking about earlier, for us, we came into it from the very specific purpose that you have already lined out. And that's a debt situation where it's like, how can we've gained so much debt, but how do I go about, I can't wait for my home to appreciate in value and then sell every time to really do something like that. Plus the values are it's always comparative. It's always going up or down. I'm not a big fan of the TSP. I'm not a big fan of the stock market or following the indexes that are out there. So what's a better way? And this was one of the things that has helped us. And now I'm recapturing. So all that money that we would have paid going towards, a credit card, or all that interest that's getting sucked up by a loan or something, we've been able to take the two life insurance policies, one for me and one for my wife, pay into the policy, and almost immediately take that money right back out and then put it towards some of the other debt. So we take out a policy loan, we put it towards the debt that is possibly a higher interest rate for some stuff, but we're paying ourselves back at the market rate of what a kind of a debt consolidation loan would be. So rather than going to these banking institutions to do that and to help us get out of debt, we've created our own bank in order to do that. So now we're recapturing all of that interest payment. We're not, even though it's our asset, we're also not stealing from our own banking business because we make sure to pay the prevailing rate of what today might be in order to get a debt consolidation loan, which puts money back in our pocket. It's one of the things that freed up some capital that allowed us to buy our vehicles outright rather than getting a loan. I think for the entire adult life of my wife and I, we've always had car loans, until the last couple of years when we were able to use some of that for that. And now, again, we're still recapturing some of that, which is awesome. We're in the process of selling our house, and we're going to recapture that and be able to pay off some of those loans and then redeploy that stuff to then continue to recapture this stuff. So it's a revolutionary way to kind of think. So go ahead.
It's an infinite concept.
Yeah.
The possibilities are endless. And the consistent thing that amazes me every time I do it is, I'll take out a loan to pay for something and I'll kind of set up a repayment plan back to myself. And before you know it, it's full again. Like I'm consistently amazed at how the money's back in my policy, even though I was expecting to be paying it back for a lot longer. And now I need to find another use for it.
Yep.
So,
well, I mean, just think about, how much money a bank makes just off the insurance or the interest payments that you're paying them. And I always encourage people to look at any sort of, not your credit cards per se on the daily average that they have, but specifically if you go look at the truth in lending piece of paperwork that typically now has to come in with your loans or your mortgages, and look at the total amount that you're paying over time.
yeah.
And one of the things that really got me thinking about IBC, and there's another strategy that I actually really like as well that's not related to IBC at all, but functionally I think it makes a lot more sense to turn a home, a mortgage basically into an asset, because for all intents and purposes, it's basically just a gigantic liability if you're looking at it from a business perspective. But how can you actually functionally make it into something else? And it's a way to kind of use a first lien position, home equity line of credit that kind of turns it more into your own checking account. So a checking account certainly is an asset to you, but you're effectively doing that and being able to pay stuff down. So combining that strategy with the life insurance policy perspective of becoming your own banker, I mean, being able to capture all of that. I mean, you look at Dave Ramsey and he's talking about how to snowball that stuff. And the thing is if you just take some extra time to get a policy started, to wait a little bit, to delay some of that gratification of even paying off some of those loans, and then turning around and then paying that stuff off, but then also keeping the payments of using that debt snowball, but you're paying the debt snowball into your own account. Like, it's not just that you're snowballing in one way, you are force multiplying that money being recaptured by your cash flow management system. And I think that's what's really powerful about it.
Yeah. What you're talking about all ties back to what Nelson Nash defined as the problem in his book, Becoming Your Own Banker, where he said the average American is spending 34.5 cents out of every dollar on interest.
Yep.
And that sounds outrageous, but if you do the math, it actually is really true. If you look at, mortgages and car loans and credit cards and student debts and all the interest, much of which is amortized. So you're front loading the interest. And therefore, in the first few years of your mortgage, 70-80% of your payment is going to interest.
Right.
Well, it doesn't take long for that to add up. And so, there's this amazing wind current is one of the terms that's thrown around a lot in the IBC world, where we're taking that outgoing interest that's kind of a headwind fighting against you, and you're turning it around so that it's a tailwind pushing you forward, paying that interest to yourself, which is then dramatically increasing your cash growth, your ability to do more with it, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And, when you're looking at a truth in lending statement, I always like to remind people, like, not only if you're in the military, are you moving every 2 to 3, maybe every 5 years or so, but if you go get a VA loan at 0% interest rate, the demand for those homes in that general area are going to go up because of the amount of people who are now able to get loans with guaranteed income and job security and stuff. So they tend to let a lot of things go, which also tends to mean that you're probably buying. You also get a VA fee on top of it. So you're actually buying at 103 or 105% the actual value of the home when you bought it. And you're moving in 3 years typically, or 5 years. And the thing is, the bank makes over 50% of the money from interest within the first 5 to 7 years. That's crazy. To think that somebody's going to be able to appreciate that much to sell it. And I know a lot more people who the only way they've gotten out has been this prevailing wind of at least the lie that housing values are going to continue to go up. It's crazy to me that they're thinking about this. And that's why a concept like IBC has been so revolutionary for me to kind of put those things really in context and go, okay, how can I give myself that money back? How can I not lose to the bank who's already set up a system that's just draining money out of it? How do I actually put that back where I'm supposed to be? So I say that to kind of really kind of relate to the military members, to kind of help them understand what part of the problem is with the banking system, but there is an actual solution. I'm so glad that you're out there providing a solution to something like this and helping people kind of coach through that, because I come across too many people where it's like, if I talk about a crazy idea, like, what, maybe we should defund the police. Maybe we should look at actually doing private solutions in this. And, private solutions, why would we ever do that? There's no way there's any examples of that. And it's like, actually there is. Why don't you secede from the banking system? Well, I can't do that. I mean, I have to go get a checking account. I have to get loans from them. Actually, no, you don't. There's a perfectly good solution right here.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You're good. Go.
No, you go ahead. I was just going to keep talking. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I really can't. To me, this is a really good introduction. I think you and I are going to have. I really kind of want to dig into some of the nitty gritty stuff, and I hope you'll indulge me with some of that from your coaching perspective as well as we continue this conversation. Hopefully, I mean, you and I are only a couple hours apart, so there's no reason why we can't go do this in a coffee shop somewhere and shoot some live episodes or something like that too. So,
absolutely,
I certainly would love that. So, I'll do kind of the burst fire question. So, you can answer this just from a general ownership perspective as you being a business owner in general. So what's been the toughest thing about being a business owner? And I'll even go a little bit further than that. What's the toughest thing that you've encountered as being an IBC coach so far?
Oh, well, those are kind of separate answers in my mind. So, being a business owner, I think the biggest kind of hurdle that I would have to go over is my own mind.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't come from a background of any entrepreneurial spirit or any of these ideas. And I've noticed kind of the more I thought about things over the years, me and a couple other close family members, we kind of tend toward depression a bit. And so, fighting against those thoughts of, why am I bothering? No one's paying attention. It's not going anywhere. All these negative emotions that kind of get in the way of your thought processes and slow you down so that you just don't do anything. Well, I mean, momentum is vital. Momentum is key. You got to get beyond those negative emotions and kind of boost yourself up and say, no, I can do this, keep going, keep producing. There is a reason, there's hope for doing this.
Right.
Whereas specifically being an IBC coach, by far the biggest hurdle is the fact that people think they already know the right answers.
Right.
I forget who it was. It might have been Nash himself or someone close to him said that basically the problem in the world isn't what people don't know. It's what they think they know that just ain't so.
Yeah, that's a great quote. Yep.
We talk a lot about unlearning in IBC, that there's a lot that you have to first get rid of and break your mind of certain habits so that you can realize the truth of the new information that you're saying, because it kind of goes contrary to what you thought before. And that's why it's such a long process to get people involved in this system, because they start seeing it maybe a year or two in, and then they continue seeing it maybe 3 or 4 years in, and then they really want to start going, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm in a position where it's a little bit hard for me, where, I'm talking more anti-war stances. I'm talking, anti-Fed positions, and these are all concepts that are harder for a lot of military members and a lot of the rah go get 'em crowd. And part of me, I want part of that crowd to still have that rah, but understanding that there's a difference between being a community and a nation and a country of people outside of what the government is telling you what it is. And people just don't understand how ingrained into this consumer society and how propagandized and how marketed this whole thing has become. And I don't know if I even have it here. One of the books I'm currently reading talks about, this one. So you can get this one for free off of Mises.org. But it's Douglas French talks about Walk Away, the Rise and Fall of Homeownership. And he's specifically talking about how the government actually has influenced the banking industry in building up the mythology of every man, should have his castle, and building the home ownership myth for the entire United States. And really that it's a function of finding a way to commoditize our borrowing and to monetize the borrowing and spending, which has allowed our military to go. Wars are the most expensive things that I can think of in historical context, and even in modern history, modern times. And the fact that we've been able to monetize our debt so effectively to allow us to basically be at perma war all the time, just messing with other countries and not just letting people be and live their lives, even if they don't have the same ideology. It just, for me, it flies in the face of what, I raised my hand to serve. And it doesn't feel like I'm serving the right way, which is the cracking of the egg that has opened up my whole mind to all these concepts and all this other stuff. And so it's hard to be able to unlearn all of that stuff for myself. And I certainly know how hard it is to take a concept like IBC and have everyone unlearn, just from cash flow veterans perspective, just unlearn all of the garbage that we've been taught about our country. And yet I still think it's one of the greatest countries. I still honor people's willingness to stand in the gap for other people to protect people that can't protect themselves in certain circumstances. But at the same time, you take that attitude and it's almost like it's been commoditized.
Yeah.
And it's just frustrating for me. So my rant there is over. I apologize.
You say indefinitely, but it's at the expense of our own economy, which has been, we've steadily been seeing the decline, not necessarily in terms of, again, the stock market, because the stock market isn't a good indicator of the economy, but the massive debt, the unstable nature of everything that's been just growing and growing and growing. It can't go on forever.
Nope.
And, it's funny when you talk about that, I think about the fact that war used to be a means of profit, because you would go, you would kill a bunch of people, and then you would take their stuff. And so that conquest, that looting, was a source of income. That's how you paid for the war, was you won and you stole a bunch of stuff. Well, we're not doing that unless, you count like the oil fields and things like that. You can get into the nuances of all that. But what I'm talking about is we're not in war for the sake of plunder necessarily. We were in war for the sake of control and power and all these things, which have their benefits, but they don't directly pay for themselves.
Right.
In fact, from a lot of the stories that I hear about, Iraq and Iran and the places that we've kind of stayed in long term, we're paying a lot of money to keep that kind of control and people subverted and that kind of thing there. So we have to pay for it from the U.S. economy on ground over here.
Yeah, the only thing I guess I'd push back on, and this is one of the So every month I'm taking like a theme or a topic and I'm really getting into it. So certainly one of these days I'm going to be getting into the military industrial complex and really how it's solidified its ability to continue to make money. And again, like while it might have been for more naked plunder previously, there's still plenty of plunder that's going on, even though maybe the goals of control and power have certainly changed for, having, and it's not for the freedom or the benefit of us as individuals. It's really for the perpetuation of state control, in an international sphere. At least that's what I'm really seeing. But again, as far as plunder goes, I mean, your Boeings, your Lockheed Martins, your Raytheons, like all these big government contractors, and a lot of them who are in the S&P 500 that are well connected to the banks and well connected to government contracts. I mean, they're making out like gangbusters over the last 15 years. I mean, they've had like record profits for a lot of this stuff, and the government will continue to bail out some of these companies when it's not needed. I believe it was the 1990s or early 2000s when Boeing almost went under, and instead of the government going, hey, we're just going to buy these from you, it's like, you know what? We're going to pay more by leasing these jets rather than buying them from you. That way you can stay in business. And it's kind of like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with what you said. I think what I'm trying to get at is they've gotten a lot more subtle with the plunder.
Yeah. Yes. Subtlety and sophistication for sure. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Well, and it's also, the way that they create the debt is also a way that they don't have to go back to taxpayers and go, hey, we need to sell bonds now. We need to do war bonds so that we can go to war. Because, I mean, throughout this state history, as far as we understand, for the Westphalian system and some of the stuff beforehand, you had to go tax people in order to go fight. When the money ran out, it's like, well, we got to bring these soldiers home now because we can't keep doing this.
Yeah. And you're kind of going back to the banking idea now, because we're getting into the fractional reserve system, which is terrible. Like that's at the heart of a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, trying to get out of the banking system and privatize it.
Yeah. So this is certainly some of the, dare I say, some of the autistic stuff that I think a lot of libertarians and Austrian economists, at least the people like you and I who are kind of regular people getting into this stuff, that this is really kind of some of the nerdy stuff that we're really getting into and where we're coming from. So I'll take it back from that a little bit and just ask you one simple question about what's the number one resource that has helped you? But then what is a number one resource that you would provide to somebody interested in IBC? Or at least the first one you would.
Yeah, well, I think the one we would provide is primarily kind of a personal education and strategy.
Yeah.
So our approach is very relational, very personal, and honest. Like I have, not only have I seen our team members turn people down, but they tried to convince me to not buy another policy at one point. Because when my wife and I were looking to buy our fourth policy, they were saying, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. Let your previous ones grow a bit, get more stable, and then you can. And we're like, no, we want the fourth one. And then we bought a fifth one soon thereafter. So, it's a very honest, like they say explicitly so often, if we can't get you, if we're not convinced that we can put you into a better financial position tomorrow than you are today, we will tell you plainly, and we won't sell anything to you.
That's awesome.
So it's very relational. It's about the person and their strategy, their situation. One of the most valuable things that we do, both at the beginning and anytime our clients want to afterwards, is we do what's called a client dream conversation.
Yeah.
Where we, depending on which team members you most relate to, who you might be meeting with different people, but we talk about, okay, what are your dreams, your main goals, the things you're trying to accomplish and want to capture over these next 3 years, I think is the time frame we use. Okay, there's that. What are the fears, the things you're worried about, the things you're trying to avoid or get rid of your concern over? And then what strengths or resources do you have? And we kind of combine all that together into a personalized strategy for that person with their financial situation and say, all right, here's the step-by-step path forward. And, we can tweak it. You can ask questions. There's no pressure here. It's just, this is what we would suggest. And you can spend the next 3 years asking questions for all I care.
Yeah, for sure. I think you just kind of struck something in my mind a little bit. I think doing an analysis of somebody that is at a different stage, whether that may not be an enlisted member or an officer or something like that, and maybe taking like, hey, this is what it would be like to have an IBC policy over that 20-year career period that you would be having. Or, hey, let's say you got started at 15, at 5 years in or at 10 years in, and let's see what this policy would actually do for you in comparison to what the military benefits. And I think it'd also be a way to keep introducing the ideas and kind of breaking down the barriers to talk about uh, how we monetize our debt and how we print money in our society is part of the problem. And then one of the things I always like to point out is or at least one of the questions I like to ask is, why does a military person even pay taxes? Why does a military person whose pay comes from productive people's taxes now is also taxed? Why not just pay me less and just not tax these people at all? Like, what's the point of doing that? And it turns out, well, we have a financial system that they need to tax you in order to not just pay for other things, but they need you to put money into Social Security. They need to put you in these other vehicles that they've created. That way you get the benefit later on, but it's also so they can fund those things today.
Well, and Social Security raises the same question. Why are Social Security benefits taxed?
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So that's awesome. And you're the fact that they have a resource they go to that's called theibcstory.com. I think that's one of the most relational things you can have out there. So again, I think that's just perfect marketing and stuff right there too. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. For me, the more I thought about it as I was starting this out, I realized that each person's path, each person's IBC kind of story, for lack of a better term, is a story. They usually come through some adversity, some questioning, doubt, and all this kind of stuff, and they're exposed to it, and then they research it, and it's very personal. It's a very individual experience. And so for me, it was all about this IBC story mentality. Like, what is your IBC story kind of question? What have you gone through to get to where you are?
Yeah. Well, kind of one of the last things here as we come to the close, like, what do you think holds people back from actually getting started with IBC?
From IBC specifically, I think mostly because they've never heard of it. And same thing with starting a business in general. I think most people who don't start a business probably just never thought about the fact that they could. That's kind of where I was for a long period of time until Stapleton ruined that.
Yeah, that's right.
But so one is they just never thought of it. And then secondly, with the IBC thing in particular, again, they hear the basics of it and they think, oh, that violates everything that I already know. It's obviously not the right answer. Basically, it's this, it can't be right. It sounds too good to be true. There's a lack of pursuit because they think they already know the answer.
Right.
Which is very common. It's not a personally negative thing or anything. It's just how people function.
Right.
So we kind of have to break through that wall of certainty and say, well, maybe it's not quite what you think it was.
I think the approach that you're going with, like the one of the themes that's been going on in my head, just with as much craziness going on in the world, is dialectic over rhetoric. Reason over the emotional side of everything that's going on. Sometimes we do certainly have to use the marketing to really break into that emotional side to get them started, to get them interested. But I think your approach, actually coming to somebody with a little bit more empathy to get to know what they want, what their dreams are, where they want to go, and then just saying, hey, maybe just take a look and let's sit down and have a conversation about how your story might be different if we look at a policy or something like this. And take as much time as you need. Ask me any questions you have. Feel free if there's something out there that contradicts what I'm telling you. Let's have a conversation about it. And I think that's such a good way to get into this and really introduce it and actually break down those barriers for a lot of people that are out there.
We see ourselves as educators and coaches.
Right.
If you ask the government what I am, I'm an insurance salesman, but that's not what I do. That's not what I care about. I'm a coach. I'm a teacher. Yeah. My job is to instruct and kind of inspire hope and freedom by these methods. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. All right. So last question here, man, where can people find more about you and what you're doing with people's IBC story?
Well, my website is theibcstory.com. That's my personal website. I also, like I said, I work with a group out of Kansas that is kind of my core team, and they are Life Success Legacy. The name is actually Life Success and Legacy, but their website is lifesuccesslegacy.com. They're fantastic guys. They were the first ones that kind of convinced me that there are people out there who are legitimately just interested in your best interest. And then if you want to just email me, I'm happy to respond to personal emails. I have an email that's Andric@ibcwithandric.com. So.
Yeah, right on. Well, I'll make sure I put those in the show notes to make sure people can click on that stuff. Andric, man, I honestly so much appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to the many, many conversations you and I are going to have. I mean, even just from this conversation we've had, like the ideas that are coming out of my brain right now are just like, hey, let's put some joint venture stuff together. Let's, how can we help as many people out there wherever they're at? And if your avenue through me is to get contact with the whole military world, I hope that I can provide something like that for you and really help you make your business successful while we're changing people's lives. And at the end of the day, I think that's really what, you and I are all about in our education and training mindset that we have for people too. So again, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I've had a blast.
All right. Well, right on. Well, that concludes today's podcast. This is the Cashflow Veteran Podcast, episode number 10 with Andric Hofrichter. Man, I appreciate you coming on, and we'll see you next time when you're back on the podcast.
All right. Thanks, John.